have concerns about your personal information being exposed online? Information such as your home address, date of birth, voting preferences, and more readily available with one search. DataSeal is the comprehensive data removal service I trust. I use it. So use the link below to receive 5% off of your DataSeal subscription and protect your family. All right, we're back with Bill Noguera. We're going to talk about a serial offender who is in San Quentin, who's been there for, I believe, a couple of decades at least, not as long as Bill has been there, but the name William Suff is also known as, I believe, the Riverside Killer, and he's known, and Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe he was the killer of at least 20 prostitutes and even his own kid at some point in time, and then was convicted, I believe, in the 90s and was sentenced to death at San Quentin. Does that sound right to you?
That's absolutely correct. He was convicted of actually beating his child, a 2-month-old little girl, to death, convicted of that, and obviously sent to death row later for killing at least 20 sex workers in the Riverside, Lake Elsinore area. So, yeah, this guy is, as you mentioned, a serial offender / he's a killer. He's a serial killer that can't stop.
Okay, so he's sentenced to San Quentin. He's in there. How did you become familiar with him?
Well, because every serial killer that comes here usually goes to a protective custody yard, and I immediately write down who's here and try and get to know him from the very beginning. I've known William Suff for about 2 decades since he got here, because I was already here, and immediately started a dialogue to attempt to study him, to get into his head, to find out more and more information about him. So it's been a while that I've known him. I can't tell you how many conversations I've sat down, spoken to him, and observed him with other serial killers and listened to their conversations and the stuff that they peddle, because they do peddle cards, they peddle victims' photographs, and the such.
Did you know him, or do you know of these serial killers? Maybe not specifically Bill Suff, but other serial offenders. Do you know them or heard of them before they come to prison? Has that ever happened?
Sure, and it happens all the time. We do have a I personally have a television that I watch the news, and in the 80s and 90s and even early 2000s, there was a lot of media coverage of serial killers. So of course I would see that one was coming here, and I would just wait. It almost seems a little premeditated, but that's exactly what I was doing. I would see when it's coming up. I heard about the case. I read in the paper. I'd write the name down, and I would wait. And once he got here, I would begin to observe him maybe for a month or two, just watch his actions, who he associates with, what are his interests. Usually serial killers, when they get here and they start feeling comfortable, they start reaching out to other people that are involved in the same area, really, of killing like them, or like-minded people. They look for pornography. They look for a lot of different things. And the big trade on death row is photographs. They get these photographs of women, a particular type of women, maybe even sex workers, and they peddle them, they sell them, they trade them. So once I understand what they're looking for, it's easy to get close to them.
Okay, well, can you tell us a little bit what you know about Bill Suff? Maybe his background, how he was brought up, whether, I know what you believe in regards to nature versus nurture, but, let's get into maybe a little bit of his background to see how he was brought up and turned into the monster that he is.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So William Suff is born August 20th, 1950. He is obviously known as the Riverside Killer, the Riverside Prostitution Killer, the Lake Elsinore Killer, and in some circles he's known as the Chili King. He was convicted of 12 murders plus a 13th one as well, and he's suspected of killing about 20 to 25 women. I believe the number is close to 27 to 32 from my conversations with him. Now, he is pretty much a normal guy. He grew up in Lake Elsinore, California. He was in the band, not a rock band, the school band, kind of a dweeb. I know it sounds kind of bad, but that's who he was. His father left his home very early. There is no indication that he was sexually abused or any of those things. But since his father left his home very early, he became...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
He became the father figure, and according to himself, he had to take care of his siblings who were all younger than him. His mother, not the best mother in the world, but he felt that he had to be the parent in the house. So right away, he became a micromanager. He is very controlling, and when he went to high school, again, didn't fit in very well. Not a bad-looking kid, but he was kind of a know-it-all, and that still is the case today. In terms of how he grew up, right after high school, he went into the military, the Air Force, and a girl that he had met really just in his last few months in high school, they started seeing each other and talking. So obviously the guy can talk, the guy is not a complete derelict or anything, but strangely enough, when he went into the Air Force, the girl that he was...
You have 60 seconds remaining.
The girl he was writing and dating became pregnant, and she disclosed to him that she had been raped. His response to that was a very curious response for a person that age, and I asked him about this. And of course, he had the perfect answer. So he told her that it was okay, that he would marry her and take care of the child. When I asked him about it, he had the perfect answer, which was, of course, I did the right thing. As a man, I took responsibility for that. There's a different take to that, which I'll get to when I call back.
Okay, continue, Bill.
Yeah, so when I asked him about that, I was very curious of his, kind of a stance. He told me that, look, any God-fearing man, any person who is responsible, who understands that things happen in life, I took responsibility to really help this woman, and I fell in love with her. He had the perfect, I guess what I call the perfect scenario. And very early on, I realized he's a performer. And what that means in I guess, a psychiatry or psychological profile is that any given situations, he begins to act. He understands what he's supposed to say, and he says it. It sounds like it's legitimate, but it's performance. It's an act. And he does that in every part of his life until that instinct, that tick in him, continues to, or it starts to dominate his faculties. It dominates who he is, and he can't control it. So he ends up actually marrying the girl. But very soon on, he takes control of the situation. In the Air Force, he tells everybody that the child died. He then gives the child to his parents, the grandparents. So very early on, the child basically disappears. And I noticed right away, although he didn't admit it, that what he was doing was clearing the path for the young woman's attention to him. He didn't like that the woman was paying attention to the child, therefore taking away from what he thought he deserved. So he took the child out of the way. We see that happen again when the woman has a child by him, a daughter. And very early on, and this is horrible to talk about, but in 1974, the woman gets a call from Bill Suff, or William Suff. He likes to be called Bill, by the way. And it's basically something's wrong with the baby, because he was a stay-at-home dad right away.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
When his wife arrives at the house, the child's not breathing. They call paramedics, they call law enforcement, they get there, and the child is deceased. When they do the autopsy, they realize, because of the bruising, that the child it's only 2 months old, and it had been abused from its birth. The most significant damage was that a closed fist could be seen that ruptured the liver. So he obviously punched the child,
Wow.
a 2-month-old baby. So a couple, not too much long after that, he was arrested, and so was his wife. They were both convicted of killing the child. Bill Suff received 70 years in prison. He only served 10 years, which is still a long time, but it wasn't what I believe is deserving of killing a child, especially infants. His wife, the court, then reassessed her conviction and reversed it, said she had nothing to do with this, that this is all Bill Suff. So, 1974, he gets out right around 1984, 85, and he relocates to Lake Elsinore, California. So I think it's important that the audience understands what happens here, Ken. So when serial killers or people that have that tick, what I call a tick, a person who is naturally born to kill, and they have to kill eventually, whether it's a speed process because he was abused or whatever, that's only the symptom. The virus itself is that instinct to kill that he was born with. Those 10 years in prison, he had the opportunity to think, to do what most serial killers do inside rather than when they're out lighting fires, doing all these things. He was doing that in his mind in prison. He was already developing how he would begin to satisfy that urge to kill. How do I know this? Because he did it first with his daughter. And there is no record of him killing animals or lighting fires, but this is the 1950s and 60s. He could have very easily hidden it. And because he is a performer, I would bet money that he did do those things and probably killed animals, but got away with it because nobody noticed.
Right. No, that makes sense. But you say that he was convicted of, 12 murders, but you believe between 27 and 32. Can you expand on that?
Sure, absolutely. So, of course, he gets in Lake Elsinore, and women begin to turn up deceased. They're manually strangled. They're mutilated. And there are a number of murders that happen between 1985, as soon as he gets out, in 1989, that they believe they're attributed to him, but no one's connecting them to him. Names like Michelle Gutierrez, Charlotte Palmer, Linda Ortega, Martha Young, Julie Angel, Cheryl Paso. These are all women that are connected to him, but they don't actually know it's him yet. How do I know what he likes, what he doesn't like? Consistency. Over the years, I see the photographs that he asks to look at. I see the photographs that he buys from other individuals here. The women are never model perfect. They're never model beautiful. They all look like they may have had a rough life. He likes a particular type because he likes to believe in his mind. He likes to affirm what he believes of all women. This man hates women. He hates the gender. How do I know? He killed his own daughter, and she was only 2 months old, because she was taking attention from the woman he wanted the attention from. And it just, during his time in prison, he graduated. And he started killing as soon as he got out. I've asked him about that, and it's a very particular response. He smiles and says, "Well, Bill, you know that I'm innocent. I'm going through an appeal process. So obviously, I'm innocent." And he smiles. And so of course, I draw him out and say, "Well, you're a smart guy, Bill. I mean, you're an editor. You've had years of experience. You're a famous cook that won awards. But you're smiling at me. So what's really going on?" And of course, I say it in a different way. And he says, and it's interesting, his response is always the same. It's like, he says, "1 second, please."
Yep.
His response is always the same. And it's almost like a chuckle. And then he says, "People get what they deserve in life." So what does that mean? I mean, seriously, we're talking among killers here. We're talking among killers here. I mean, what is it? And he says to me, "Well, women were put on earth for a reason, and that's to please men. Sometimes the sheep go astray, and the shepherd has to put them in line. That's his response. I mean, that's an admission to me. And he smiles. So I show him photographs he's asked for. And I say, well, what do you see here? What do you see? His response, whore. I said, well, how do you know? I mean, believe me, I can tell. Just looking at them, I know what they're thinking. This guy has a preconceived notion of how women are. That's how I learned from them. Now, the victims, they started right away. And there is such hatred and brutality how he kills. He severs breasts. He mutilates sexual organs. He puts the women, after he kills them, and he strangles them manually in trash bins.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
He poses them in particular ways so it demeans the woman. And then he, again, the performer, people say, well, how do you know? This is you saying what you want to say. I'll prove it. Simple. The police department of Riverside has task force that was looking for him. Bill Suff was a county worker. He was actually the man delivering the furniture and sometimes food to the task force that was looking for him. And he would make a lot of comments like, wow, you got another body today, huh? This is part of himself injecting himself into the investigation. And when the head detective put out a news media flash that said, this particular killer only kills white women or Hispanic women, we can tell his MO, he has a signature. The next time he changed it on purpose to prove to them that they were wrong. Here's the performer again. What does he do? His next victim is an African American woman. What does he do to her? So the amount of brutality is even expanded. Because now he has to perform, because the police department basically dared him with that was a huge mistake. He not only strangled the woman, she was actually 2 months pregnant. He severed her breast, and he buried her head so they couldn't see her face, and left her body exposed, posed, legs spread, arms flailed out. This is the type of man this person is. He is a brutal serial killer that would not stop no matter what happens.
So you're saying the 12 convictions, you believe there's a lot more, but do you believe that, Bill, because of just your experience in there, or is it something more specific that he told you?
Well, he makes a lot of comments to me. He actually names all the women, the ones that I named, plus the 12 that he was convicted of. He names them. And he adds other people. Now, the first ones that I mentioned, he was never convicted of those. But he mentions those as part of his flock. That's how he refers to people, his flock. So that tells me there that he is taking credit for them. Anybody that thinks otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. This guy is taking credit, and he mentions other wayward sheep. That's how he talks about them. So he hasn't told me specifically, well, there's, Cheryl Ladd that lives here. He hasn't made those comments to me. He's too smart for that. But he makes a lot of references to how police don't know everything. They think they know everything, but I'm one step ahead of them. Yes, they've convicted me of this. Yes, they've got me of that. But who knows? There might be more. He goes back and forth with this. And this is 2 decades of him and I talking. And as I said before, he's very proud of his number count, where he used to have a card that said his name, and in the back of the card it had the names of the people he's convicted of murdering. One of the names is his daughter. What he's done to those cards before he signs them, right below the names of the women there, then he writes, in his own writing, he writes other possible victims, and then he puts a big question mark and a happy face. You tell me, Ken.
Yeah. I'm just sitting here trying to process the brutality of severing the breasts of these women and posing them to degrade them. I get that. I get it, as in I've seen it before. But the severing of breasts, it leads me to believe or leads me to think of something that I heard, and maybe you can shed some light on it with Bill. You mentioned he was an award-winning chef or something, had some chili. There were some allegations from a foreman that was at his trial that he had severed one of the women's breasts and used it in his chili to feed people. Have you heard that?
Absolutely, I've heard it from him. He actually sells lists of the ingredients and how he cooks his chili. He wasn't a nationally known chili maker. He won a couple of awards from.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
At some banquet party. It was nothing, big. It was a county fair.
Right.
But yes, he likes to give people the impression that he used body parts in the chili. It's a big source of laughter for him, and really a joke for him that he actually fed some of the victims to the task force who was investigating himself. He said that to me a number of times, that he fed them that.
Wow.
And that basically tells you how, and again, why the breast? Well, I think it's also to do with the woman. He really despises the women that he kills. That's one of his biggest sources of hatred. Let me call back and I'll get into part of who he is as a control person, a narcissist, etc.
Okay. Okay, go ahead and continue.
Well, with this particular individual, what I have noticed regarding him specifically is that although his instinct is to kill and he has the gratification of killing sex workers because he believes women are all below him, the important part to see here is that while he mutilates because he hates the gender, he also hates himself. And let me explain. When he arrived in Lake Elsinore, California, he became a community worker. He went to meetings in the community. He kind of injected himself into being the person with a moral standard. And one of his biggest points was that we have to get rid of these sex workers that are near the community. They dirty the community. They're bad for the community. We can't have these people here. So he was rebelling already. You could tell his passion for what he believed by trying to get the community to look at them bad. I believe it was also to turn the opinion of the community on these women that were working, and that way somehow his mind justifying what he was doing. He was the guy who took out the trash. And he does it, his actions. This guy's a very easy guy to figure out and check him out as a psychological subject. Because everything he says, he follows through with it. He's trying to get rid of the sex workers by talking about the community. And then he calls them trash. He kills women and then puts in the trash can, and he poses them in sexual positions almost to amplify or to really amplify the fact what he believes and that he believes the community is behind him. So by him doing this, he also hates himself because he is acting on instinct. One moment, please. He also hates himself because he cannot control. He understands he cannot control that urge he has inside of him. So as much as he hates and detests them, he also needs them. He needs the sexual gratification because he does rape them. He just doesn't kill them, he rapes them. He does a lot of brutality to the sexual organs. So it's a battle within himself. His instinct tells him to do it. He needs them, and then he hates himself after. That's why he covers the faces. He usually puts a bag over their face. He usually puts a blanket. In one of the instances, the African-American woman who was pregnant, he really hated that woman and the situation because he had to perform. Because his narcissistic, overview of himself, he had to perform because the police, law enforcement said that he only kills white Hispanic women. So he felt he had to perform. So what they do, he buries your head, he cuts off the breasts, he mutilates the sexual organs, and he just brutalizes the body because he's so angry at it. That's who William Suff is.
Well, you got into a little bit of my next question, and that was, why just sex workers? Why didn't he have any quote-unquote normal victims? They were all from the same profession, and I think you kind of answered that, but can you expand on that?
Well, it's an educated guess, and from what I understand, he thinks of sex workers as beneath him. He hates the gender, the sex, and that they use the sex to manipulate men. It obviously has its basis with his mother was very domineering. She was abusive towards him. He had to take care of the kids, so he felt like he had to be the man. So he had to be bigger than anybody else, and his mother put him in that position. Now, of course, I know a lot of so-called extras say, "Aha, you see." Bill's even saying that it's something that happens in their childhood. No, ladies and gentlemen, that's the symptom. That just gives him the particular twist to what he's doing. The virus that gives a symptom is that he's a born killer, and he just needed to pinpoint what he was going to do. It could have been later on postal workers, if he would have been hit by a postal worker or something. These people are born this way. So with him, the mother is the center point of what happens to him and why he has to do what he does. Of course, he's twisted. He does 10 years in prison. But, ladies and gentlemen, he killed his own daughter, 2 months old, before he started raping and killing all these prostitutes. So he's using sex workers because he hates them, but he also hates the gender. And we see that because he killed his daughter, and we see it because he mutilates the body parts and sexual organs.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Of his victims.
So another thing I want to hit on here is, you said that he's a performer, he's a narcissist. Is that your feeling about most of the serial killers that you've interacted with at San Quentin? That do they all share that common narcissistic trait or not?
No, not necessarily. Most of them don't exhibit the type of narcissistic, self-centered awareness that Suff does. Let me give you an example. He has to be a little professor, and that's a term that's used in prison a lot. But what it means is that he has to know more about, or at least pretend to know more about everything than anybody. He did it while he was out. He was advising the task force that was there, if they would listen to what he believed was going on in the case and who this person could be. In prison, his narcissistic personality has now grown to becoming an editor. He's not an editor. He looks at a few books. Some guys here want to edit a poem for him. He does it. Now he's just not a guy that's helped a couple guys out. He has become an editor in his mind. He won a county cook-off or a chili, whatever it may be. In here, it's grown to the proportions of worldwide recognition as a chili maker. So this is the type of person that he is, and he happens to be extremely narcissistic, but not just to himself. It's to everybody. He wants everybody to know that he knows more than anybody. And if you call him on it, he gets very, very angry. So let me give you an example, because I love to test the waters of these guys. I was in the same yard with them because I was hired by the California Department of Corrections to look after and caretake these elderly people on death row who were serial killers. I was the IDAP worker. So in one of those instances, he started telling me that he was a paramedic, that he worked as a paramedic, and this is what he did. Of course, I knew that wasn't true. So I asked him specific questions about specific medication for heart ailment or a person suffering a stroke or a heart attack. He didn't have the answer. Then I asked him a question about migraines. Are migraines, because of stress? Or he didn't have an answer. I asked him questions about particular bones. And every time I asked him a question and he didn't have the answer, he grew angrier. And then finally, I told him, well, geez, Bill, how long has it been since you've been a paramedic? Because, it's been a couple of years, but you should remember this stuff. I remember how it feels to build an engine. I remember how to pull an engine from a Volkswagen or a Porsche. How come you don't remember these things? I have never seen him get so angry. His face turned red. He starts talking. His spittle comes out of his mouth, and he just starts talking that he forgot, and you don't understand how stressful it is, that paramedics are lifesavers, and he goes in his whole complete dialogue about paramedics and firemen, that he was also a fireman, and he begins to switch. His stories begin to click. He was also part of law enforcement. That's how he gets. And I knew it right there. He's a performer. It's all about himself. It's narcissistic behavior 101.
Wow. Well, do you have any inside stories like that? Any other ones that you can talk about with Bill?
Well, let me give you an example of how the kind of coward he is. And so the audience knows he's here with me right now. So, of course, the next question is, of course, well, Bill, I mean, you're talking about people that are here with you, and doesn't that, again, put you in a bunch of danger? Okay, yeah, well, I'm stating the obvious. Yeah, but at this point, doing this show with you, Ken, it's been, 9-10 episodes. People are going to find out eventually, what do you want from me? Look, what does Daffy Duck say? Consequences, consequence, as long as I'm rich. They're going to do what they're going to do. I can't help other people's opinions. For me, it's more important to teach and to educate the public so this doesn't happen to somebody else. So someone's daughter is not found buried because a guy like Bill Suff was able to pick her off. So that's more important to me. But regarding Bill Suff, yeah, I can tell you a story that would just pretty much blow your mind. Give me a moment, please.
Yep. And Bill, let me ask you this before you go with that story. You're not scared. You're not afraid of Bill Suff, right? He's, 76 years old? He can sure still, handle a shank if he needed be, but I get the feeling, and after reading your book and talking to you for the past half year, that you're not afraid of Bill Suff.
No, I'm not. Look, it's not that I'm a tough guy or anything like that. It's just I'm very confident that I can defend myself. Now, of course, it isn't just Bill Suff. Bill Suff is not going to do anything. He's a coward. It's other people in the prison system who are part of gangs who would possibly figure, look, this guy who is, by all accounts...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
...has now turned. He is working with kenmains, who is a former detective and FBI investigator, and that means that he's turned. So that's going to be the attitude towards me. Sure, there's something to be worried about. These guys are very dangerous, obviously. The apex predators in prison who hunt other men in prison are something to be very concerned about. And I understand that the risk that I'm taking. That's the best answer I can give you, Ken.
Okay, all right. Give me your story on Bill Suff that's going to blow my mind.
Oh, yeah, you're going to love this, and the audience is probably going to love it. So this is about 2017 when I was the IDAP worker, and there was an incident in the yard where, they're playing cards. Bill Suff is sitting at a table. There's two other serial killers playing cards. And there's a third guy sitting right across them, and they used to call him Tex, also a pedophile. And he said something to a guy, and the guy got very upset. And it didn't register, but I could see it. The guy heard what the guy told him. He told him something like, hey, it's not your turn, wait your turn, screw you, or something to that effect. And the guy kind of looked at him, and he turned and he walked away. Now, this is a yard for people usually 16 over with disabilities, hearing, walking disability, most of them are in wheelchairs. And the strangest thing happened, Ken. The guy this guy Tex said basically, go screw off. He walked across the yard, and then it hit him like, this guy's just disrespected me. He turns around, and he begins to walk towards the table where Bill Suff and the rest of these guys, serial killers, are playing cards. And he has a cane because he walks with a huge limp. Suddenly, the limp is gone. And I'm watching him from across the yard because my antenna is up. I see what's going on. He picks up the cane, which is a very heavy oak cane, and he lifts it and he slams it over Tex's head, splitting his head open from the very top of his head to the bottom. It's a bald guy. it just ruptures, and blood is everywhere. But the cane snapped in two. So the guy's beating this guy, and Bill Suff is sitting across from the guy who's being beat. He's his pinochle partner. Bill Suff gets up. His eyes are big as saucers. And at the same time that he gets up and backs away from the table, he bumps into the wall. He's sitting there watching this happen. The guy who has now one edge of the cane in his hand, who suddenly realizes, wow, it's a sharpened end. It snapped like a knife. It's like a very long steak, like a vampire steak. At that same moment, Bill Suff sees what's going on. He attempts to run, but he limps. So he trips.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
He's in such a hurry to get away from this thing. The guy who's stabbing Tex now turns the stick and begins to stab him in the abdominal with his wooden stake. I mean, right there, fully stabbing this guy. The gunner sees what's going on and draws down, blows whistles, begins down. Everybody down, down. Bill Suff is on his knees, crawling away from the situation as fast as he can. And I can't help but chuckle. Here's the tough guy, the paramedic, the fire guy, the chili king, on his knees, crawling away from the situation. Let me call you back.
All right. All right, when we last left, Bill Suff is crawling on his knees like a scared cat. Is that the story?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And I, look, I realize that, a guy's being stabbed, but look, he's a child molester, okay? He killed a child, that's why he's in prison. The other guy is a serial rapist. I wasn't in too much of a hurry to sit there and say, okay, I gotta somehow defend these guys. They made their bed, they have to lie in it. My job is not to interfere in any situation. And I was told by the warden when I came out of the yard, if you see something happen, don't get involved. It's not your job, it's the gunner's job or whoever's job to protect these men. It's not my job. So I watched the thing with kind of a fascination to see how these guys respond to every given situation. And that was part of this whole thing, was to see his behavior. Now, I didn't cause the incident, but since the incident happened, I took note of exactly what he did. And that was to crawl. Now, that's a natural instinct to get away from a situation because you could get shot. It was just kind of funny to me because all the rhetoric they talked about being a paramedic, a fire guy, law enforcement, and none of those things are true. And that was obvious when I saw him crawling away from the situation like a coward.
Well, yeah, I just had an important note I wanted to bring up there, and then, of course, I forgot it, but I wrote something down here that I want to bring up, too. I didn't want to bring this up till the end here, but I will now. You mentioned the, 20, let's just say, 25 murders that this guy did, and he was convicted of 12. How do we solve those other murders? How do we get resolution to those family members who may be victim to Bill Suff and they don't even know it?
Well, I think it's kind of easy. I think you probably know the answer to the question if you kind of just think about it a little bit because, look, they convicted him of 12 murders. So the state of California thought, okay, we got him 12. He's off the streets. He's on death row. That's it. We don't have to reinvest money to convict him of all these other charges. So they let the case lay dormant. They attribute all these other names that I've actually mentioned to him, but they haven't convicted him of them. So they remain open because there's no closure or finalization. I believe DNA is the best way. He left DNA everywhere. They have his DNA. They have the DNA of these particular victims. And if they just run it and actually put a few hours into that, I think you probably solve 80% of his murders because of that right there. They're not looking into it because they're closed cases.
Right. He's locked up. No need to put more money into it. Sure, that happens all the time. It's just, for me, some of these family members that, they know that their girl is missing. Maybe it isn't even a body. They're just missing, and they don't know what happened. It would be nice to be able to knock on their door and say, listen, I know she's missing, there's no body, but Bill Suff is responsible, and this is how I know.
Yeah, well, most of his victims, they found them. As I mentioned the names before, Michelle Gutierrez and Julie Angel and those women, they found the bodies, and they really they attributed it to him, but they didn't really close the cases. But his list of victims in terms of the people that he actually killed, and they know is him. And I can name them really briefly: Kimberly Little, Christine Leal, Darla Ferguson, Carol Miller, Cheryl Coker, Susan Sternfield, Kathleen Moline, Sherry Mason, Kelly Demon, Catherine McDonald. I mean, the list goes on. Catherine McDonald was actually the African-American woman who was pregnant 2 months when he killed her. So the list just goes on. Dela Zimor, Eleanor Cassers. It just goes on and on. And it's a sad situation that we should invest a little bit of money and time just to close these other cases so the families know what happened. They can attribute to that guy. They know it's him.
How did they attribute, or at least convict on the 12? Was it DNA, or did he ever confess or anything like that?
Well, it was actually pretty simple. He drove a silver van, and a lot of people talked about this van. The most damning evidence was when they pulled him over, and because he made a wrong U-turn, and the police officer, who was just a regular traffic police officer or a normal officer, pulled him over and searched his car. They found a bloody knife in the back of the van with a lot of different, like, rape kits. He had rope, he had all these different things. Well, one of the parts of this crime scene that was so interesting to law enforcement was that the van that he had 4 different tires from 4 different makes on his car. So when the officer called into headquarters and said, "Look, I got this car pulled over, I found a knife," it happened that the lead detective of that task force was there. And her question to the leading officer was, "Tell me the brand of the tire on the right-hand side, the front right-hand tire." The officer went and looked, came back, and told her. She immediately told the officer, "Hold him, I'm on my way." When they got there, she compared all the tires and they matched the set of tires that were at the crime scenes. Of course, there was DNA, so it was a pretty easy case to make once they knew who he was and they had the evidence. He also did some really flip things where the victims were. One of the victims, he killed her in an orchard for, I believe it was an orange grove. And after he murdered the woman, he peeled an orange, ate it, and tossed the remains right there with her. And he also severed one of her breasts and just tossed it. So it gives you the kind of disregard for the victims that he showed throughout his career. So that's how they caught him. They were saying it was basically the tire marks plus then the DNA, of course, and not the bloody knife in his car that matched the victims, the knife that was used, as well as the all the different stuff that went along with him being who he was. Gotcha.
I remember the question I was going to ask earlier after you were telling the story of Bill Suff crawling away from that. You were on that yard, that protective custody yard, for a while. Violence was, I'm going to assume, not the norm on that yard, or am I wrong?
You would be wrong. This is actually a very interesting question because,
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
During about a 6-month period, while I was in that yard, and I was assigned to that yard to be a care provider, not because that was my yard. I still went to a normal yard, which was a yard right next to that one. But during about a 6-month period, there was more violence on that yard than any other yard on death row. And we've been on the phone when I say the alarms are going off, something's going on. The next time we talk, I say they just stabbed a guy in the yard. And this happens, several times a month. This past month, we've had like 4 stabbings in less than 3 weeks. Well, for about 6 months on that 88 yard, around 2016, it was the most violent yard on death row.
Wow. I guess when I'm picturing it, I'm just picturing a bunch of old geriatrics in wheelchairs on that yard. I guess I'm probably picturing that wrong.
No, you would be absolutely correct. But again, we've talked about this. These men have slowed down because their bodies have basically betrayed them.
Right, that doesn't, their mind.
The same mind.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Still the same mindset.
Right, and if you give them an opportunity where they can respond to something physically, they'll do it. Now, of course, it's a very short period. They can't get into a fight with a bigger guy. And look, there are guys in that yard that have faked to go on there. They have, for whatever reasons, they don't want to be a normal yard because they're afraid. Maybe they've told on somebody. Maybe people are going to find them out. They owe money, whatever. And they go to the medical department and say, look, I can't hear. I can't hear and I can't see. And they give them a test and, no, I don't see that. Of course, I can see it. Oh, no, I don't hear it. So pretty soon the doctor said, look, this guy's hearing impaired. He's visually impaired. And they put him on that yard. So there are some guys out there that were in their 50s, 55, very dangerous. However, well, you know this. You read the other book, Through the Lens of a Monster.
Right.
And remember the guy that, Rockhead?
Yep.
Who was trying to pressure? That's a perfect example. You have guys in that yard who are extremely dangerous and they're convicts. They have, because they want to be there for their own safety, they choose not to do anything to these guys. But they're out there, and they're predators.
Wow. All right, very interesting. All right, anything else you want to add on Bill Suff, and specifically before we go?
Well, only that, he is a predator. He is guilty of the crimes he's convicted of, and he is not going to stop. He is going to continue living the lifestyle he lives because it's who he is. There is no cure for a serial offender, a sexual serial offender that continues this mindset. So I would be, I guess, in some ways, oh my God, I'm looking for a word, but it's just like, it's very important that the public know this, that you cannot rehabilitate these serial predators and rapists and child molesters. I know there are people out there with a more liberal sense of this. I'm speaking from experience from watching them when no one else is watching. I speak to them when they don't have anything to lose and they're not before a psychiatrist or a parole board to try and perform and say that there's somebody else. They cannot be cured because they don't want to be cured, and that instinct in them overrides everything else in their minds. They're sociopaths. They are as well psychopaths, and they're very dangerous. And I've always said, always end the shows, Death Row Diaries with be safe, be aware of your surroundings. Your life could depend on it. I mean exactly that. Your life could depend on these type of, and look, you were in law enforcement a long time. You know what I'm speaking is true. These guys are out there, and they're very dangerous. Be aware. Be aware of your surroundings.
Yeah, and one last point I want to bring up is I believe, and this is my opinion alone, is that the justice system failed once again by releasing Bill Suff after 10 years of killing his 2-month-old child. And all those victims that you named and rattled off, they would still be here today if the prison didn't let him out.
Yeah, I concur completely.
Yeah.
Those 70 years that he received for killing his daughter, he should have done 70 years.
Right.
Actually, he should never have gotten out. But 10 years, this is the prison system in the 70s. And unfortunately, a man got out. They let a man out who went on to kill what I believe is as many as 32 women.
Okay. All right, Bill, thanks once again. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we go?
No, just remember, please sign up for my newsletter, get all insights about what's going on with me. And that's about it. You can find it at my Instagram page at william.noguera.art, as well as my website, artistwilliamnoguera.com.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, and everybody can find his links and stuff down in the description of the show here. They're there. Just copy and paste them if you can't click on them, and go to wherever you need to go to check out Bill's stuff. So, all right, Bill, I thank you. Hang on the line here, and I'll end this.